Italy is voting on whether to change its constitution, a move that carries potentially huge risks for Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's political future. Her government is pushing for changes that it says will make the courts more independent and efficient. But critics say they are a threat to the judiciary's independence. There's a lot to unpack here, and Rome correspondent Seema Gupta will help us do that. We'll explore what makes this referendum such a high-stakes vote and why it could usher the end of the career of Italy's first female prime minister. Italians are already voting on whether to support Meloni's proposed changes. They include separating judges and prosecutors and overhauling the judiciary's oversight body. Results are expected on Monday evening. But many believe this referendum has become a vote on Meloni's political future. A loss could badly damage her authority as Prime Minister, though she said she will not resign if the referendum is rejected. With turnout expected to be key and the result on a knife edge, this vote is shaping up to have significant consequences for Italy's political landscape. Let's come to Seema Gupta in Rome now. We will discuss the reforms in more detail in a minute, but Seema, first, give us a quick overview of what is at the heart of the changes.
Well, these judicial reforms, if passed, could be the biggest overhaul of the judiciary since World War II. And it's quite complex and technical, but in essence, really, it's about splitting the judicial governing body into two separate entities, covering the magistrates and covering the public prosecutors, and also the makeup of these bodies, but also consolidating the separation of the career paths for judges as well as public prosecutors. And the last opinion poll on this issue published officially 2 weeks ago showed that two sides of this issue, whether you're voting for it or whether you're voting against it, are really neck and neck.
So Seema, tell us, why does the outcome of this vote carry such risks for Meloni's political future?
Well, Prime Minister Meloni really has been in power now for 3.5 years. And overall, that's been a fairly stable government as far as Italian politics is concerned. And in fact, she prides herself on her stability. And so this is really the first major test for her government. She wants to see these reforms pass through. And if it is not, it will be seen as a major crack, perhaps, in her governing stability, a major defeat for her. So it's quite important for her and her right-wing coalition that these reforms get passed.
So, Seema, what you're saying is that this effectively is becoming a referendum on Meloni herself?
Yes, in a way it is, precisely because this is such a complex and technical issue. In the end, and also the divisions have become very sharpened in the course of the campaign for this referendum. So you have Meloni and her right-wing coalition pushing very much for the yes vote, saying that these reforms will create a judiciary that is more independent, while you have the opposition as well as some magistrates saying that it is essential to say no to these reforms precisely because they need to make sure that the judges remain independent.
And Meloni has said that she won't be stepping down even if she loses the referendum. Tell us, how would it erode her power in case she loses the vote?
Well, if she does lose the vote, it really will be a blow to her credibility, if you like, especially as she's prided herself on making sure that there's a stable government in place. And if she does not step down, and she said she's made it very clear, in fact, she's come right out to say the general elections will be in 2027, and that's when you can vote on me. Vote instead looking at these judicial reforms. Now, another impact on a possible no vote would also be the consolidation of the centre left. They can present themselves as a credible alternative to her in the event that there is a win for the no camp. One must not forget that during the general elections that saw her come to power, it was all about the fact that the centre right could form a coalition, whereas the centre-left was very much fragmented. And so this might be an opportunity for the centre-left to actually consolidate their movement.
Okay, so Seema, let's zoom out a bit here on the world stage, Giorgia Meloni is widely seen as a surprisingly pragmatic conservative leader. But her connections with President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu are becoming politically costly. There have been protests against the Iran war. It is extremely unpopular in Italy, and voters are already grappling with its economic consequences. So, Seema, how is the Iran war affecting the vote in Italy?
Well, the war is very much unpopular here in Italy, and the war with Iran is associated with President Trump and his foreign policy, and he is an unpopular figure here in Italy. On the other hand, you have Giorgia Meloni. Now, she's been a long-standing ally of President Trump, and this is proving to be kind of problematic for her. So she has a delicate balance to play where she has to still maintain her role in being an ally of Trump, but not trying to oppose him too publicly, if you like, but at the same time keeping some distance from his positions. And we've seen that in some extent. I mean, we've seen her criticize very strongly the bombing of that Iranian school in the initial stages of the war. And she's also been very clear to say that Italy will not be part of this war in Iran. So she's made herself clear and trying to get that distance between what the US government is doing.
So we can say that the Prime Minister is facing a dilemma. As you said, that she is distancing herself from the Iran war, but she's also trying to maintain a good relationship with the US President. Is public buying that positioning?
Well, the public here in Italy really wonder whether that's exactly the case. And really, one of the issues that's been brought up is the embarrassment for the Italian government, and the opposition really jumped on this. The embarrassment for the government when the war started, because the Italians were not informed when the war actually began. And in fact, they said if Miss Meloni is supposed to be, at some point, some referred to her as the Trump whisperer, is she really supposed to be that close to him if the government wasn't even informed? And in fact, the defense minister was on a family trip in Dubai and actually had to be brought back to Italy. So they really were in the dark about this war.
And what are some of the other factors? Like in many other countries, we have seen people are worried about skyrocketing fuel prices and cost of living. How much is that a worry in Italy?
Well, absolutely. I mean, Italians are very worried about the economic impact. They're seeing rising oil and gas prices, and they're wondering how this is going to be affecting cost of living. So really, the bottom line is how it affects their wallet. So while that is really in the background and is a bit of a distraction when it comes to these reforms on the judiciary, it has some impact when there's concern about how these reforms are actually going to work, and people are just looking to see, okay, who's supporting the yes vote? It's the government, and who's supporting the no vote? It's the opposition. So in the end, it's kind of being divided on those issues. At the same time, they are worried about how this war is going to be affecting their bottom line.
So, Seema, let's return to what the referendum is about, what you just mentioned. The government has proposed 3 major changes to the justice system. First, it would split the roles of judges and prosecutors, aiming to make courts more impartial. Second, it would overhaul the judiciary's governing body, introducing a system where some members are chosen by lottery instead of election. Third, it would create a new disciplinary court to oversee judges and prosecutors. So, Seema, one of the key proposals is to separate judges and prosecutors. Why is that such a contentious issue in Italy?
Well, this has been a long-standing issue for the center right. I mean, you just have to go back even as far back as Silvio Berlusconi. I mean, there was always this talk about what they referred to as left-wing magistrates and left-wing judges that were there. And they are against this, what they refer to as a too cozy relationship between judges and prosecutors, where the judges preside over a case while the prosecutors are pursuing a conviction. And if there's too close too cozy a relationship, you're not going to get a fair deal. Now, they say that these reforms, as you mentioned, they're separating the career paths, separating the bodies, the governing bodies for both magistrates as well, for the prosecutors as well as the judges, and also how these groups will be chosen. I mean, on the one hand, you have drawing lotteries from eligible judges and prosecutors. On the other hand, a section of these bodies will also be drawn from, again, drawing lots from a list that actually has been approved by a parliamentary majority. And the government says that this will prevent factions from forming within these governing bodies. And in fact, Ms. Meloni herself has often referred to left-wing judges making decisions that prevent her from carrying out her policies, particularly on issues such as immigration.
Seema, I have to be honest, it seems quite complicated and complex. Tell me, do Italians, are people understanding all these complexities of these reforms there?
Well, for a lot of Italians, you're absolutely right. It really is quite technical. And a lot of them don't even understand. There have been many events organized throughout the country to try and explain it to Italians. And the campaign has taken on a very strong fight between the two sides. While the right has been pushing their case, you have the center left as well as magistrates saying that, in fact, it's having the opposite effect. And what these reforms will actually do is to make things more political and allow for more political interference into the judiciary. And that is why they're pushing so hard against these reforms.
So explain to us a little bit more, why are the critics of these reforms so concerned? What are their arguments?
Well, the critics say that by making the decisions by drawing lots, it's going to result in things being very disorganized. And on top of that, also, it's going to result in a less of a legitimacy for these bodies that are going to be governing these prosecutors as well as the judges. And the fact that a list of them is going to be picked by the parliamentary majority implies that there could be political interference. And precisely because of this, they feel that this is not something that should be approved and that the constitution should be kept as is. And in fact, maybe some have even suggested, yes, maybe perhaps there should be reform of the judiciary, but doing it this way, it's actually helping the current centre-right government in their agenda.
And Seema, for our viewers, explain to us, how broken is the judicial system in Italy? Is it a really big problem for people?
Well, there are a lot of complaints from people about the fact that the cases move too slowly, the prisons are overcrowded. And Ms. Meloni, in her campaigning, has actually said that she believes that these reforms are going to make things more efficient. But critics, including current judges and important prosecutors, have actually said that these reforms don't actually address these issues, which are the burning issues, like the fact that cases move so slowly. And in fact, are not touching that at all. That's how they see it.
So, Seema, after all of this, with so many factors at play, do you think Meloni will survive what is shaping up to be one of her biggest tests yet?
Well, she has made it clear she's not stepping down. She's come right out and said it. There will be a general election in 2027, and that's when there will be a real test for herself as well as her coalition and her government. But however, it will be a blow to her agenda. For the most part, in the last 3.5 years, she has presented herself as a stable and important choice. She has got the credibility as well in the EU level, and she's worked at that. So this really will be a huge huge blow to her government. The opposition has said that she needs a convincing yes, that the vote and the percentage that she gets does count. However, this vote is really about a simple majority, and no quorum is actually required for the number of people that are going to be voting. So it's a yes or no. And if a no wins, that is clearly a crack, if you like, and a significant defeat for Ms. Maloney. If it is yes, she will take this as a sign that she can push forward with other changes and other reforms that she has in mind, and she will go into the 2027 general elections, perhaps in a more secure position, if you like, according to analysts.
And lastly, Seema, if Meloni loses this referendum, do you see more political instability in Italy?
It's not so much political instability because she's still the prime minister and will remain so till the end of her mandate. That is her position, and technically she's allowed to go through that. However, we might see the centre left become more consolidated and present themselves as a credible alternative to her. So they're seeking this as an opportunity to come up on top. We'll have to see, of course, what comes out at the end of voting, which ends on Monday at 3 p.m. The exit polls will give us those projections, but of course, we'll have to see what comes out in terms of how close this vote will be in this referendum on judicial reforms here in Italy.
Seema Gupta in Rome, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us. So, with Italy's referendum well underway, what do you think? Will Meloni's government get its way, or will a major turnout of no voters upend the Prime Minister's plans? Let us know in the comments. And since you've made it this far, like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for joining us. Take care.